Hello and welcome to Future Commerce, the podcast exploring the intersection of culture and commerce. I'm Philip, and we burned the Pope. We burned a picture of the, the Holy Father, and we're going to explain why here today on this episode of Future Commerce. Also, out now everywhere. You probably heard it at the top of the show. The multiplayer brand, our new zine, and it covers some of our thoughts on why we would ever think of burning an image of the Pope. Um, no, that's not in there, but a picture of the Pope in Balenciaga is in there. I'm holding it up. If you're not watching our YouTube, go check it out on YouTube. But the multiplayerbrand.com is an easy place to go pick up our new zine, 100 pages on the future of commerce, participatory economies, and the age of critique. $20, free shipping, same day shipping in the lower 48. I think people learn more about our industry when they break bread together. Certainly, you and I have grown our network and grown our influence by sitting across the table from brilliant people, right? It's kind of how we've built this whole thing was getting to know people and sharing an experience with them. And what better way to share an experience than Brian, taking you on a tour of Pacific Northwest wines for 4.5 hours around a dinner table. Yeah, so, we've learned a lot over the years by breaking bread together. We've become known at Future Commerce for hosting salons, and now we have this new Future Commerce learning offering. If you are an agency operator, uh, or you're building high performance teams in a brand, if you're brand operator side, if you're wanting to go deeper down the rabbit hole as a brand operator on the topics of retention or new customer acquisition, and learn more about things like loyalty, uh, this is for you, and they are incredibly deep. But something new too, an overlooked portion of the e-commerce ecosystem is the software providers that make it all happen. And so, we've been critical in the past about the middleman economy and the e-commerce ecosystem. The truth is that software powers customer experience, and one of the ways that software businesses find their scale is by growing their channel organization. And so, you'll see it in the next few months. You're hearing it here first on the podcast, but we are building education for software companies, for agencies, and for brand operators to help them in the hardest parts of their business. And so, if you are a software company, if you are in the SaaS industry and you want to launch a channel partner program and connect with agency partners to grow your influence and grow your revenue, we're going to teach you how to do that. And it's our first foray into education, but we have the brightest minds in the ecosystem coming
We
around
do.
us to help. And you'll see a lot more about that in the weeks to come. But it's been a busy week here at Future Commerce. It's also been a busy week in the world of CPG. I don't know if you saw this, Brian, but
Yes.
Campbell's Corporation acquired a beloved spaghetti sauce brand. I guess that's it's
Wow. Yeah.
sauces of all kinds. Rouse.
They're in
Have you ever
Costco, by the way. Yeah.
have you ever bought Rouse before?
No, no, actually, we're pretty, well, we're into doctoring our own. So, like,
Yeah.
spaghetti sauce is like one of my signature moves, and I got a whole thing behind it. I if you ever come over to my house and you want to sit across the table from me and you want me to cook for you, my spaghetti sauce is part of that magic. And no, it's not truly authentic Italian, but it is delicious.
Yeah. That's a bummer. I've never tried Rouse. I'll tell you, this is one of those things that happens in the ecosystem where a brand is supposedly beloved, but nobody can take the time to talk about it online ever. Especially for way like insanely priced products. So Rouse might be the most expensive, sauce brand in its category that is at a normal grocer. The first time I remember,
that's why they went for so much money.
I'm sure it's why
2.3.
I had 2.7 billion,
2.7.
2.7 billion.
Jeez.
There was something that happened in the public discourse. Of course, it happens on X, formerly known as Twitter, on a post formerly known as a tweet, and a thread of
Thread.
posts.
What?
And in that discourse, it was people saying, "Campbell's, please don't ruin Rouse," right?
Yep.
And I know so little about this brand and could not tell you a single thing about this brand. I've never seen anyone publicly come out in support of their spaghetti sauce in the history of
I
ever.
have. No, no, I've seen a few. I've seen a few out there. I've seen people be like, "Yeah, Rouse is the best of all time" on
Really?
Twitter, form or now known as X.
X, the one to go to for Twitter. Yeah, I've never seen anything of that sort. It was very surprising for me, but there is a canonical thread on that did make the rounds yesterday. Alexis Ohanian, the founder of Reddit and now the VC, the like well known VC, also Palm Beacher. He, kind of tagged on to say brand matters, especially in commodities. What's great is that readers added additional context saying, well, Campbell's didn't really purchase Rowell's. They purchased Sovos Group, or Sovos Brands, which is the parent company of many brands. Rouse is one of them. You know what nobody is saying is, don't mess up my Noosa yogurt, Brian. I love my Noosa. So I find this interesting if we want to maybe if we want to look into this for a second is why this also, by the way, I'm going to conflate this with another story and put these as and juxtapose them. Almost nobody is mourning the loss of Mr. Beast Burger, which there was a news story this week of Mr. Beast now suing the ghost kitchen that operates under a license for Mr. Beast Burger for failure to deliver on a quality product or service that he was happy with, and he's trying to get them to discontinue using the Mr. Beast brand in the operation of their product. You heard it here first on Future Commerce. Back in February, we did a community challenge where we had, I think, 8 or 10 people in our community all order Beast Burger on the same day at the same time to do a distributed taste test. And the results were resounding. Not only is it overpriced, but the product was middling. Almost all of them arrived cold and soggy, and we just thought it was not an experience, no matter how stellar the brand or how much you want to be connected to Mr. Beast, not an experience worth replicating at $16 to $18 a person, delivery only. And so it's no surprise to me that Mr. Beast is now discontinuing Mr. Beast Burger after having publicly come out against it on Twitter. Why is it that people can bandwagon for one brand? In both cases, we've seen bandwagoning on both sides of the spectrum. One, in a successful exit and sort of support of the brand and petitions for the parent brand not to ruin it. And quiet as one winds down that was formerly lauded. So I'd
I
love for
do
you to
wonder.
maybe think about this, Brian. Think about
I
it
no,
out
no.
loud.
Here's my quick viewpoint on that. Very hot take is that Mr. Beast is the brand. The Mr. Beast brand is amazing. The problem is that as Mr. Beast tried to spin that brand off into other things, some of those things worked, some of them didn't. And so the brand wasn't really the burger, it was Mr. Beast himself. And so so really people were bandwagoning on Mr. Beast doing a burger which sounded awesome. It just wasn't good. Um and so
You could say that again. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Whereas like Rouse and actually Noosa is actually one of my favorite yogurts. It's delicious. It there's no influencer, there's no other part to the brand other than the product itself. So whereas with Mr. Beast, the product is Mr. Beast. The product with Rouse and Noosa is the food itself. People are fans of those foods and they're in. I think you see this happen in the founder ecosystem all the time. The founder actually is the brand. The founder is the product. And the things that the founder creates may or may not be good, but that's not the product. That's not why people are bandwagoning. They're bandwagoning on the founder themselves. Um, and so I think that's what you're seeing here is Rouse went well. If Mr. Beast himself sold to another company, he would go for a lot of money. If he's trying to sell his burger brand, it wouldn't go for much at all. Um,
This is the w- for what it's worth, Rouse has never been mentioned on Future Commerce prior to today. However, Noosa
Noosa
yogurts
has.
has been mentioned at least once in episode 242 entitled "Conspicuous Consumption." You mentioned having at least 3 in the fridge at all times.
I
Um,
love lemon Noosa yogurt. Actually, I love all Noosa yogurt. I love yogurt in general.
I find it really interesting that uh, there is a kind of a person who wants to be part of a moment. So the moment here, it has nothing to do with the exit, and I almost believe it has nothing to do with the product quality. And I would even maybe question the validity of how many people are in this Twitter thread, sorry, X thread. Uh, I would question that how many of them have ever actually bought Rouse sauces. And I'd put the number, I'd set the line at 20% having actually ever even tried the product, where maybe 5% are
Hmm.
loyal, and I think that that's on the high end. I do not believe that people engaging in this discourse on this particular social media app are actual customers. I think they are people who like to participate in moments, especially
Bandwagoners.
brand moments. And
Yeah.
so there's a bandwagon that forms around a brand moment, especially in a slow news cycle. Because apparently, between our last podcast recording and this one, the economy's good now. We like the economy. Economy's great. So what else we're going to talk
I
about,
mean, if
right?
a spaghetti sauce and yogurt brand parent company can go for 2.7 billion, the economy's doing pretty great, I think.
Yeah. Then if they can do that, you can do anything.
You can do
Uh,
anything.
You can do anything. And well, this is where we're starting to see more of this type of activity now. There's M&A certainly is
It's
heating
back.
up. It's back. We saw Ninja
Investment.
brands went public just about
Hmm.
a week and a half ago now, where and this is an interesting one. I was actually when we were at the Retail Innovation Conference, we we had a happy hour event, Brian, that we put on at
Yes.
Future Commerce, and, Brendan Wichter is it Brendan Wichter? Who's the
Yeah.
Forester
Butcher.
guy?
Yep. Brendan
Yeah,
Witcher.
Witcher. Um, he and I got into a long conversation about, like, the areas of your budget that you don't consciously plan for, but everybody seems to spend for. And there seems to be a 2 to 3 year cycle for spending money on the it appliance. Like, what is the it appliance? Like, there was a Dyson vacuums had a moment, and iRobot, intelligent vacuums had a moment, and then we had the Ring doorbell or the Nest thermostat, and then it was the Instant Pot, and then it was the Ninja Creamy is probably the most recent one, right? Um, yeah, and so you see
Instapot.
these,
Instapot went bankrupt.
but it doesn't mean that. I mean, that could have just been the financial management of the organization.
There's a lot of
Is
commentary on this.
yeah.
Many, yeah, people love the bandwagon on commentary around failing companies as well. So,
Well, here's the so what of it all. Um, I've heard more people talk about it appliances in real life than spaghetti sauce. And that's why I don't believe that like that, and they are large and considered purchases. That's why I don't believe that people actually care all that much about the spaghetti sauce or the quality of the spaghetti sauce, or would even notice a decline in quality of the spaghetti sauce if they're frequent buyers of it.
I think you're
It's
right.
yeah.
So especially with something like this, where like I am a Noosa super fan, genuinely. Did I tweet about this acquisition? No.
Doesn't
Although we
matter.
are talking about it on our
I guess
podcast.
we're talking about it on our podcast that serves over 50,000
But it
executives
has
and
nothing
leaders
to
in
do with my
the
love for
retail
Noosa.
ecosystem. Yeah.
Like, yeah, oh yeah, thank you. Sorry. Yeah, I talked over your total
I love
amazing
it. No,
plug
I
there.
like the crosstalk. That's very, like, modern now, us just
Yeah, it's
talking over
true.
each other. Yeah.
Totally. No, but like honestly, like we're not talking about this because I love Noosa. We're talking about it because it's a moment. And I
Yeah.
do love Noosa. So
But we have room in our lives for moments, and I think moments can be reserved for things that provide us some discourse. And if you notice the pitter-patter of conversation and small talk that happens in the world, they are monocultural. right? But with your own perspective. Everybody experiences weather, but yours might be different. Everybody experiences a weekend, yours might be different.
Yeah.
Everybody experiences the it appliance, yours might be different, but nobody cares about their spaghetti sauce. I'm convinced that this is not a
No.
thing. It's not a
No,
thing
man, I
worth
don't know about
talking
that. I
about.
think people care deeply about their spaghetti sauce. I just don't think that those are the people that are posting on, like, that's not like you said, about 80% of the people that are
Yeah.
posting about it right now are not the ones that deeply care about it. But I think that people deeply, deeply care about their spaghetti sauce. This guy included. I just pointed
Whatever
myself.
what did Campbell's ever do? Like, why is Campbell's so hated?
Well,
What is the deal with that?
because Campbell's canned soup is objectively not that good. The original Campbell's was like kind of nasty. Like the there's been
I think it's
so
just
much.
fine. I think it's just fine. It's just
You
fine. There's
must
nothing wrong with
not
it.
be good in making soup.
How much soup does a normal person eat anymore?
I
Like,
mean, we eat a lot of soup in my household. Like a lot. Like
dude, I must be
we
as
eat.
dude, you know who's not eating soup? South Floridians. We're not eating a
True.
lot of soup.
True. Maybe you're just
Global
like
warming is going to kill the
the
soup
soup the
trade.
soup
Yeah.
trade. Uh
Hottest summer on record, and
whew.
everyone's caring about their spaghetti sauce. Guys, you gotta get on the light and refreshing stuff. You're gonna be drinking a lot more suja in the
True.
summers to
Actually, I do
come.
have a
Yeah.
moment I want to talk about at this moment, like now, because it actually
Sure.
is a moment that's affecting a lot of
Gazpacho.
people.
Producer Erica says
Gazpacho.
gazpacho instead. I this is a very small sample size, but we did do a for FC Learning last week in our filming. We did do a team dinner, and gazpacho was on the prefix menu at Cafe L'Europe. Not a single person at
Love
the
that.
dinner chose the gazpacho, and it was 97 degrees outside. That tells you
Yeah,
everything you need to know about
it's not my
gazpacho.
first choice. It's not my first choice.
It's I don't think it's anyone's first choice. Anyway,
I've had good gazpacho, but usually there's something that like appeals to me a little bit more when I'm. I don't know.
yeah.
I don't know. I don't know what I'm talking about. Great restaurant, by the way. Love that restaurant.
What? Oh, L'Europe? Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
so
great.
there was a moment that affected a lot of people throughout the
Mm.
US and world, and that moment was when I walked into my Costco the other day. The suja that they had was not my typical green suja, and it
This is
was some
it's this
ginger lemonade thing instead with little cayenne, which
it
is
affected
delicious.
everybody. We
I
know it did.
actually went to a Costco further away because I was like, what if they stop carrying Suja? The Suja that I wanted. Like, it's the green one,
You got in the
evergreen flavor.
car and you took yourself to a different
I
Costco.
took myself to a different Costco. Thankfully, they stocked it there, but I'm concerned that they're trying to replace it with this other lemonade one, and I'm gonna have to like I'm gonna pull out all of my Costco fan cards, and be like, you cannot stop carrying the Suja if I have to. If I have to pull that out, I will.
Well, one way that you could affect change on Costco is by participating in Hyperstition, which would be for you to imagine what a Costco of your liking could look like. And you can do that now because we have tools to do that. And hey, you could create a moment out of this change in merchandising and product offerings by drumming up a media moment online around it in much the same way that we've seen around Rouse and Campbell Soup.
Exactly.
But that's how I'm doing our little bridge over to
Well
today's
done.
topic. Um, one way for us to take stock of the way that the future of commerce is shaping up is that we've been saying consumers hold more power than ever before, right? I think you would agree. Consumers have an
They do.
unprecedented amount of power in the way that brands market to them, right? Shape the products and their offerings for the customer. You've worked at Amazon, right?
Briefly.
You you worked at Amazon. What is Amazon's perspective on the customer and the
Oh
importance
yeah,
of
I
the
mean
customer?
customers like, yeah, number one. Having an empty chair at the table,
Yeah,
empty
it's like
chairs and empty
Elijah.
tables.
We save a seat for the customer, like we're we're gonna keep the door open for them. You see how I'm doing the little religious tie in there?
There it
Don't let
is.
it go unnoticed. This is how we explain all of our artwork. Um, yeah, it's funny how religious that some brands are about their customer, and how absent the customer is in some other brands, right? So, what we did in writing our zine this year as part of our visions uh, content is we imagined what the future, the near future, might look like, and try to explain the existing moment and what the future of commerce might look like. And we call it the multiplayer brand. And Brian, you want to give like a little pitch on what the multiplayer brand zine is all about?
Yeah, the multiplayer brand is about. I mean, you've already kind of covered it, Philip. We are living in a time where brand is evolving. It used to be that brand was a fixed point that was developed by a company and their agencies, and then pushed out through channels that they controlled, and they controlled how that brand was consumed in a very fixed places and fixed ways in channels of their choosing. But now with tools and the internet and AI and and less and faster feedback loops from customers and online communities, the brand is no longer your own. You do not own your brand the way that you used to. You may start it, you may provide narrative, you may provide
Hmm.
viewpoint, but when you bring that viewpoint to the market, all of a sudden it takes on a life of its own in communities, in critics, in multiple places throughout the world, in places that you don't control. And therefore, hyperstition, which is a term you just referred to, Philip, which we've talked about before on the podcast, is happening in the world of commerce by by people now taking a brand and making it part of their own story, and and fashioning it in their own liking. And when people do that in concert together, they're actually a more powerful driver of that narrative than you as a brand are on your own, and can actually manifest where your brand heads as a result of this collective power through these tools and through these ways of electronic communication. And so
Woo!
that is the multiplayer brand in a nutshell. And if you want to understand how this is going to affect you as a brand, you should reach out to us, because we can help teach your team and give you real world reasons why you're going to have to change what you do and how you do it as a brand, as a retailer, because of this new way that brand exists in the world. And we can actually help you with that and can contextualize it to your business.
I think this rouse, the rabble rousing around Rouse's route online has rooted our discussion in this idea that there is a public discourse, and the public discourse begins with critique. So this is what the multiplayer brand starts out with: is we believe that our economy is becoming much more participatory, and people are raising their hand saying, I want to be part of the story, not just of the brand, but in everything in culture. And if brands are a bigger part of culture, right, and they have displaced some place where people find belonging, community, and like-mindedness with other people, then brands have a higher uh, order of meaning in people's lives. And that means that people want greater control of the cultural artifacts that brands produce. So let's say last year's visions report covered this actually, and you'll actually be able to buy this for the first time coming soon. We've never made our physical print versions of our prior visions report available to anyone outside of our contributing team and our advisory panel, but that will be coming soon. But what we said was we call this the sacraments of commerce, right? This idea that there are things that brands do that take the shape or follow the playbook that other large systems of belief and community organization have historically done. One of which might be religious affiliation. So if that's why we use the word sacrament, it is finding parallels to belonging, membership, communion or communal experiences, um, customs, right? Rituals, things that brands try to impose or bring about as in response to their own customers' demands of them. So this year we're exploring this idea of hyperstition and sort of the creation of a relationship with your customer where they have more power than ever before. And part of that is this idea of generative AI, and that customers can actually imagine what your products would look like. They're no longer just saying, bring back an old product, right? And in times past, it might have been, I miss Kellogg's cereal straws. Why can't you make that again? Right. And there might be reasons why, and there might be a lot of lead time, but generally brands tend to listen to their customers. And a couple years ago, I think we saw this right. Someone wrote a petition on change.org, also mentioned here in the multiplayer brand book. They wrote a petition and got hundreds of thousands of signatures to bring back this nostalgic treat, and Kellogg's eventually gave in to it and said, "Yeah, we will listen to our customers and we'll recreate that and bring that back." That happened contemporaneously to the Snyder Cut, which was another moment of hyperstition where customers were able to bring back something that never existed in the world and create something that never existed based purely on rumor and speculation. So now we live in an era where they can do that with everything, not just this idea of a concept of a film and not just this idea of a nostalgic product. But what if we could bring about the idea of a line of Paperware by Balenciaga? that and we can imagine what the Pope might look like. Um, the Holy Father dressed head to toe in Balenciaga. What might that look like? And we can do it now with such stunning fidelity that it can trick a certain person into
Yes.
believing that that is a real image.
And this is a huge issue. It's not just brands on popes. It could be
Brands on popes.
brands on popes. This is if everyone is a brand, this
Yeah.
could be you. This could be Balenciaga on you, which most
Mm.
people may want, I guess.
We actually had somebody, so we did in part of our marketing for this book. We had this incredible photographer, Gabby Perez, who did this just incredible series of photos of the book. And one of them, she takes a number of pages from our zine and lights them on fire. One of them, Brian, is this picture. If you're watching on the YouTube, you'll see it. If you're not, maybe subscribe to us on YouTube. But you'll see it's this picture of that was created in Midjourney of the Pope, and you know, it's called the Balenciaga Pope, and it's a Midjourney image. It's also next to other Balenciaga fashion runway send ups in culture, including what Snape and other Harry Potter um, characters might look like decked out in Balenciaga. The Pope one was mistaken and mistakenly reported as being a real shot in a couple of outlets. And what we actually mentioned here in this book is that um, this quote from Henry Jenkins. I want to read this to you, Brian, and then we can talk a little bit
Yeah.
about this. Us being called out about burning the Pope, because that
It wasn't actually
that
the Pope.
yeah. Okay. Well, we'll get there.
Yeah.
Henry Jenkins, who's a prominent media scholar, created this idea of the participatory culture, and this is what we said here. Uh, as a prominent media scholar, Henry Jenkins' concept of participatory culture highlights the active involvement of consumers in creating, sharing, and engaging with digital content. He says, "Quote." Participatory culture shifts the focus of literacy from one of individual expression to community involvement. And this, when let's link up a bunch of disparate ideas here now. Uh, we talked a little bit about the place that brand has in everyday life now, and potentially the sharing of brand with the system of belief and finding of system of belonging. We've talked about the idea of critique, right? And calling and hyperstition and creating an environment to have a moment. And I can't think of anything more subtextual than Balenciaga of all brands being the one portrayed as being on the Pope,
Yep.
right?
Yeah, just
And
considering like recent scandal they've had um around, you know, uh you know, basically like sexual misuse and yeah,
sexualizing children
yep.
in Dimna's, uh, uh, a recent
Was it
campaign
teddy bear
within the last
campaign?
year.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's, a lot of people, Kim Kardashian and a bunch of others, sort of came out as former spokespeople for the brand for Balenciaga and said this is unacceptable form of marketing. It has its own subtext. It's creepy, right?
Mhm.
Not only is it creepy, um, but it's unacceptable, and we will not sexualize children in bondage wear as part of our, as an aesthetic that we say is acceptable in our culture. So to put the Pope in Balenciaga has its own contextual meaning. That requires, and going back to Henry Jenkins' quote, it shifts the focus of literacy from one of individual expression to community involvement, right? So we're moving to this idea of the discourse being not, hey, look at what generative AI can do, but we're juxtaposing your literacy of a number of things having to you have to be caught up in the discourse to understand the subtext.
Yep.
And the discourse is Balenciaga canceled, Pope- the Pope wearing Balenciaga, and the Catholic systematic cover-ups of sexual abuse of children over decades, and that scandal is also something that you should be aware of if you're aware of Balenciaga's use, and the way that the reason why Balenciaga would be used in this way.
This is where things get really tricky though, because the question is how how much do you need to know for art to make sense to you before the art itself starts to like become something else, right? And so
Mhm.
then all of a sudden, now you have a there's multiple people out there who may have a misunderstanding of what that image was all about. And so media literacy is at the center of this, and understanding, you know, how much information do we need to know to be able to participate in current discourse. What happens when an image like that gets proliferated out through a set of people that don't actually know all of the history and back story here.
Well, let's go one layer deeper, and then
Yeah.
we'll zoom out just a hair. What we did, and what our photographer that the artist that we commissioned to create some art about the multiplayer brand did, was take it a step further and reference through the burning of this one page in the book, and made a reference, which now a cultural reference to, and this is now over a month and a half ago at the time of this recording. We set out to make our photography of this book happened well before Sinead O'Connor passed. There was a very, very clear cultural moment with the then Pope John Paul, where Sinead O'Connor tore a picture of the Pope as an act of critique and protest at the end of a Saturday Night Live performance in the 90s, speaking out specifically about the systematic cover up
Yep.
of child sex abuse scandals within the Catholic Church decades before it actually became a culturally relevant conversation. And she was made fun of and turned into sort of a poster child for some sort of uh, you know,
Anti-religious.
right,
Yeah.
anti-religious fervor, and maybe even to some degree being sort of crazy, right? So people sort of depicted her as having some sort of like mental breakdown, or someone that has embarrassed themselves on a public scale, until she was wrong, until she was right, until the
Yeah.
culture decided that she was the forebearer of a coming enlightenment that we
Yep.
would have around at a future date. But and not to like piggyback on Sinead, and but I think that what to understand why we would burn an image of the Pope, and this specific one, you would have to understand that brands are at the center of a moment that are displacing both the religious artifacts and behaviors and belonging sense and community in some people's lives, but also that the generative AI of it all is creating an opportunity for people to make bigger cultural critique of
Yes.
both the nature of brand and religion in our world.
Well, and not only that, but this also gets back to the training data that the AI, has. So this has been pointed at a number of different assets and public images, to create this moment. And I think in this case, like maybe Balenciaga would not be okay with this. Certainly, the Catholic Church is not okay with it. This is how far can you control uh, how your images and how things are being used? Well, actually, a lot of companies right now are suing OpenAI for training on their data
Hmm.
and images. And there's a big case coming up with Sarah Silverman that could drastically impact how AI is allowed to be trained on data. Um, and so I think this is a big open question right now: is are we going to be able to have a singularity in the future, or are we going to be living with a bunch of unique AIs that are trained on a more specific set of either of like clearly public data, along with like a specific catalog of data.
Well, this is where the platforms and social media platforms like places where people aggregated human knowledge have now become publishers. And the
Yep.
publishers see this content as, like we're now in a new era, I think 20 years post MySpace. We're in a new era where we're seeing the participants in these social media networks as content creators, right? Not just as normal people sharing what's happening and engaging in a conversation, but people who actually drive value and eyeballs to these platforms need to be compensated for their creation, right? So
Yes.
this need to commercialize that model and to keep people coming back to create content on those platforms. We're seeing X just did their first creator payout. Obviously, other platforms, YouTube has probably the highest margin or the highest payout for creators of any platform, and continues to pay out at a great scale and share profits with its creators. These platforms would not exist in absence of the creators themselves, right? People who create compelling content, and that's why all of these companies like Reddit and Quora want to
Yep.
prevent companies like OpenAI from training on their data, because they have an unbelievable amount of human knowledge in their walled gardens. So why would they not want to capitalize on that for themselves? They are publishers. They want to monetize their content. It is their
Correct.
right to do so. But
Then
another
so fair
happening,
use starts to come into play here. That's what's
yeah,
happening in this
this
Sarah
is all gonna.
Silverman
This is where we're gonna have
case.
to. I mean, who knew that? Uh, uh, an older female comic known for crass jokes about her vagina would be the one protecting intellectual property, and intellectual and her own, and for an entire industry around content creation, training data, and public use and fair use. Um, who knew? But here's what I will say.
Anything's
That's
possible. It's like
Anything's possible.
you
We're
think of something crazy and it probably will exist. Like just Google
but
it; it already exists.
this is where I believe that this is, its own. Uh, we're in a devolving landscape as far as the capability with AI, because it is getting markedly worse. These
Right.
experiences are getting markedly worse as the retraining has to happen because of cease and desist. As AI content uh, has a very specific cutoff because of the nature of homogeneity in the content. Because you don't want AI to be training on other AI generated content, you get into this homogenous devolving loop. And interestingly enough, uh, we I saw this recently. FWB Fest happened this week, and a bunch of folks were sort of live tweeting, and there are live streams available publicly on YouTube where you could go watch these. But um, there was a talk by Hip City Reg on Twitter, and in this sort of conversation, one of the quotes or the pull quotes that I saw that really just resonated with me was this idea. Well, if algorithms, and in particular OpenAI and its chat GPT feature, if that gets worse because it's being fed itself, right? It's eating its own tail. It's training on content that's come from itself, and maybe even AI art having a similar thing where it just becomes regurgitating other things that the algorithm had created. What does that mean? Are we sort of at the end of history of like unique things being created, and from here on we'll just continue to recycle old things in some new and novel form? And the response is, well, that's literally what mass media has done to culture. Like
Yes,
that's been
100%.
happening in culture forever, like for the last 100 years, well, maybe 50 years. um, we're sort of doomed to keep repeating certain eras over and over and over again because culture has become its own
It's
training
eating its own
data.
tail. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
totally. Yeah, I think it's like it's not new, right? Once we
Mm-mm.
started creating images of things, that we were bound to continue to repeat them, because they, they aren't going away, and they we can only consume so much. This is another thing. Like people can only take in so much data, and so like right now, there's so much good stuff out there. I was just talking to our videographer. He watched 12 Angry Men for the first time, blown away by it. And we were talking about our top five favorite movies. It made his top five favorite movies. And, he, you know, it's, I think
That's
this
funny.
is the crazy thing. There's so much content that's actually quality out there. There's no possible way that we can consume it. I like we're pretty prolific content consumers, you and I are. And I
Mm.
feel so overwhelmed by how much more that I want to get to. It is impossible for a human, not even close to possible, to consume the amount of good content that exists in the world already.
But I would make a distinction, not to nitpick your words or police your words. I would make a
Sure.
distinction between content, right? A movie, film, and cinema. There are levels to art form, and
Sure.
people could get really
Okay.
finely grained about it. But like
Whatever the word
content
is,
is
like,
like
you know,
fundamentally modern. That's like a
sure, sure,
new
sure,
thing,
sure, sure.
right?
Like content, whatever this literature, art, like music, that
Media.
it's been cataloged and it exists. All things now exist, not forever, because we know that about the internet, but there's so much that's out there. We are
Yeah.
never going to get to all of it. That's that readily available. We're only going to get to the things that are put in front of us at that moment. That's why things can get recycled, because there's too much good stuff already.
But
Like,
I also believe that there's a nature of there are two things that happen that seem to be inexplicable in the human experience. One is there's nothing new under the sun. You can unintentionally recreate something that already existed in the world and have never known about it.
yep,
That is
Google
a
it. It
fact,
already exists.
right?
It already exists.
There's another thing of simultaneous inspiration where
Right.
multiple people are all pursuing the same thing independent of each other without really having the same context. It
Happens all
just
the time
happens in the
now
world, right?
because we're all getting fed all of this data at once, and like it's natural that simultaneous inspiration will happen because people are all focused on these things that are being fed to them at one time.
Right, and I believe probably some of that's very subliminal. I was just talking with
Mhm.
Zoe Skaman, who recently subscribed to our content and found us through Matt Klein, who is a new contributor of ours. We love Matt and Zine and the work he does over there. But he recommended this to us because she apparently was working on a new talk that she called the multiplayer brand. She had
Hmm.
never heard of us, never knew anything about us, and she wasn't following us on Twitter or anything of that nature. She just thought this thing is a thing that she sees happening, and she wanted to name it, and she came up with the same name. He said, "You need to go get the zine by Future Commerce." So she orders the zine. What she and I had a conversation about was uh, in the time of Isaac Newton, right, you would have uh, individual uh, multiple people would happen upon the same fundamental laws and come up with the same solutions for things,
Right,
right? The integral and calculus and modern calculus independently was created in both Europe and in India near simultaneously in the world.
right,
And you had cultures that would create things in the realms of science, art, literature, and mathematics, right? Classics that were simultaneously all occurring at the same time, independent of each other. Today, that's happening uh, in fashion and in cultural discourse and in brand, right? It's happening in a different level, and that makes me really wonder uh, if those things are now being elevated to some, this is my hot take, is that, brand is a form of art, and there are brands that are content and there are brands that are cinema. And certain brands have been able to create something truly superlative that become works of art unto themselves. Those are the multiplayer brands of the future.
right.
Not every brand,
Yeah,
not every
that's right.
Shopify like drop shipper brand is going to be. They're more akin to content. They're a podcast that'll never be consumed in the future. They're a blog post that will never be reread ever again. They're a tweet from 20 years ago that'll never ever be seen. But that doesn't mean that there aren't truly artistic forms of that type of thing. And that's where I do think that there is true originality left in the world, but we're not going to see it from AI.
Not
Um,
from AI, that's for sure.
but we can use AI to make the critique and to make the kind of
Well, and I think you can use it for a certain level of like inspiration. But I recently wrote a short story, and for future commerce, it's called The Wrong Part. And I actually, to start the story, I went to OpenAI and I prompted the heck out of it and refined the prompt over and over, and I extended the story, and I had it write a 3,000 word story based on the premise of that I had come up with, and I refined it over and over, and the the best that I could get to was unoriginal and boring and something that I would not want to read. And maybe that's my lack of skill with using OpenAI to write the story that I wanted to write. But if I combine the two, like if I compared the two stories, that one that AI wrote and the one that I wrote, I I at least found my original story that I wrote to be 100 times more compelling than the one that AI put together. Now, what AI did was incredible. The fact that it could write C level high school work uh, is, maybe even B minus, is astounding. And yes, we're going to use AI for the critique. We're going to use it to do a bunch of grunt work that no one wants to do. But yeah, for original art creation, we're still the center of that. Humanity is got to be the one to bring the new ideas to the table. It can't come from just retraining on the rear view mirror, as Marshall McLuhan would say.
Yeah. And if you enjoy the work of Marshall McLuhan, if you've ever read The Medium is the Massage or Understanding Media or anything else that he's created, then I think you'll like The Multiplayer Brand, out now by Future Commerce, 100 pages, a zine, our first zine, but not our first piece of print. Pretty soon, you'll be able to get this along with our other pieces all in a bundle and save a little bit of money. But for now, you can get this $20 free shipping in the lower 48, same day shipping, themultiplayerbrand.com. And I'd love to know your critique about what we've just talked about, because we do live in the age of critique, as we just said here, and what the multiplayer brand covers. Give us your critique. You can drop us a line at hello@futurecommerce.com. Or why don't you, if you want more to critique about what we're creating, you can subscribe to our newsletter, which will be in your inbox 3 days a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, with our perspective on the things that help you see around the next corner. If you are in retail, e commerce, marketplaces, or direct to consumer ecosystems, then you need to understand what the future holds, and we can help you see that and make it clearer at Future Commerce. And you can get all of that and more at futurecommerce.com. And if you want to
So
subscribe,
much more.
futurecommerce.com/subscribe. That's it. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Future Commerce.